this to you in a little bit.
Oh boy.
Anyway, I really hate standing in front of people. So this table acts as a barrier between, and also it holds me up in case I faint. So we're talking about worship, and we're going to talk about it a little bit differently because it's kind of more related to my life journey in discovering what worship is, which is a little bit different than where I may have started off. So, I know you guys can't wait. We're going to pray, because I think we want to see some Holy Spirit work here in this, and now we'll get started. Okay. Lord, we ask that you would come. Holy Spirit, speak to our hearts. Quiet us. And do your work, Lord. We surrender to you whatever preconceived notions we have about anything, including myself. And we ask that you would just do the work, rebuild stuff, redefine stuff, reorient us, and that we would be open to hearing your voice and what you're calling us to today. We pray that while we're all awesome people, that we would leave this place a little bit awesomer in you, and that you would engage with your children here, that we would engage with you, Father. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so worship 166. I thought today what we could do was just revisit worship, because it's like a topic that we hear about all the time if you're a Christian, right? Hear about worship. Part of my story is how I've been reorienting myself and my ideas of worship. And then part of what that table is about like renewing ourselves to Jesus. So this story begins with Kara.
Oh, wow.
Lovely
That's a surprise.
Kara.
Yeah, I don't
What is it? I
understand.
can't see.
A long time ago.
Hasn't been a picture.
I'm getting you back.
Can you validate this presentation?
Half of this presentation is like Kara. No, a long time ago, Kara asked me this question. What do you think God is saying about the worship culture at the 166? We were like on vacation. Just kidding. So like, this is a really heavy question. It's a huge question. And I personally love huge questions because it gives me endless amount of material to obsess about, right? So I think she asked me this last year, and I've been wrestling with this question for a long time because I couldn't really come up with a nice answer for her. I think I may have written her like 3 emails about like what I think it is. It's just like gathering all these thoughts. And so I was like, okay, I don't understand because, you know, I worked on staff at a church for a long time and I know how to build worship culture. Like I get it, but this is not like regular church, right? The 166 is like your non-church church, right? Like it's different. So I'm like, you know, and we're all about the service and we're all about the teams and like stuff. Like I know how to do that, but I don't know how to do this right here. And so I started thinking about the larger question, like how do you build any kind of culture, right? So I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking, okay, well, you can't build culture with just one person. One person might catalyze the whole thing, right? Come up with a vision, but then you have to have like broad buy-in, right? And I think we do have a culture here at the 166. We're all about being the church and not doing church for 2 hours, right? So we are the church everywhere we go and wherever we are. So I was thinking about this more and more, and I'm thinking like, man, if we do nothing at all, we run the risk of allowing other things to determine the culture of worship at the 166, right? This is is a fairly newish group, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of worship voices out there that are pretty powerful. So I'm like thinking to myself, like, we need to think about and form together what the worship culture is here. That's why you guys are all here, because you're going to do this with us. So I thought what we could do is go back to the basics and ask, what is worship? When we think of worship, what do we think of? So I need your input, okay? I'm an auditory person, but I'm also a visual person. So can you guys take out your phones and go to this website? You can't see it? pollev.com/WLE176. And just think, when you think of worship, and just type it in.
It's Paul what?
EV.
Like Edward Bill.
Edward Vivian.
Oh, EV.
.com. Is it really small?
No, it's a glare.
Oh, it's a
For me.
50 years.
Kind of small.
It's kind of small.
Kind of small. Just read it.
Well, you guys
I
come closer.
We got it.
/WLE.
178.
Yeah,
178.
you were born in January of 1978.
No, I just happen to be the 178th Debbie Lee.
It's anonymous.
It is
Right.
anonymous.
It's anonymous.
So hopefully, if it works right, your answers will come out here, right?
Wow.
I said hopefully.
That's cool.
So high tech.
So
I
listen,
know.
but listen, I'm high tech, but I'm also cheap. So I got the free version. So maxes out at 25 responses. So if you have like 8 responses that you are like trying to, you're gonna have to. Is it working?
I have 2 responses remaining.
You have 2 responses that are not working.
Wait,
They did not
John
come up
put
here?
one in. John put
Yeah,
one
it
in.
should come up
Yeah,
here.
you're saying-
Hang on.
25 total?
Hang on.
Is
So
there
if
an
people
app
do
for
3
that?
each.
25
Wait, is this
total.
one word or can you write a
You
sentence?
can write whatever you want.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
What's the Wi-Fi password?
Oh, Wi-Fi password. That I can help you with.
If 8 people write 3 answers, it's full.
Oh.
Yeah, we can only write 1.2 answers per person.
That's all you get.
Okay.
1.2 answers.
Or we could
No,
pay
no, no.
for an upgrade.
Should I write one?
Right one?
There we go. Is that better?
Oh, is it going up?
Oh, here we
Yes.
go.
Oh, that's so cool. Is there a way to?
In teeny tiny letters.
I
So
can
so
read it.
far I'm
Lifting
here.
up
I'm
God.
seeing lifting up God, giving worth to something, turning to Jesus and giving Him our undivided attention, holding dear.
Refresh.
I put in one.
It has to
Refresh.
you have to refresh, I think. That's mine. That doesn't push it.
Yeah, this is. I know.
Dang.
What's the Wi-Fi
Hey,
password?
Yeah. Well, it's the
Which one?
website, right? You have to refresh. It's not.
You think
I
so?
can't.
It's not
It's like
email.
it's like a black hole.
Oh.
Oh yeah, that one is.
Unless there's like a
Hey, what happened?
notification instead of
I think it's-
something.
Erased it.
You did?
Not like.
It's okay.
Taking
That
it.
stinks.
Kind of cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Hold on a
Like,
second.
really
Yeah.
neat.
Thank you.
This was cool until
Now I try it.
it didn't work.
Yeah, I see mine
We
now.
saw 4 of them up there.
Holding down.
I think that might be there too.
There we go. It keeps filling up. Oh, now it's.
Good job, guys. These are good answers.
Wow. I just-
But we can
Oh,
text
so it is
too.
pushing. Oh,
You can text,
Oh, I
but
like
then
that
you have to
technology.
text, and then you have to get
Yeah.
information, and then blah, 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 blah.
Oh yeah, look at mine became the biggest.
Oh my goodness.
Did you-
It's not a
did you answer it?
competition.
No, I tried one. Dropping down.
Dude, look at it, mine is still the biggest.
Oh, that's
No.
so nice.
He typed it the loudest, so that's why
I
I
hit the
was
keyboard the
biggest.
hardest with my thumb.
Yes.
You did it in your voice like an audio thing.
Any
don't
others?
get the mic.
Anybody else?
I'm doing mine.
Mike, I wanna get one
You didn't put a limit how many words
God,
can be
David,
in
I'm
it. He's
still
gonna be
thinking.
here all day.
I didn't take arrows.
He's writing a
You know,
dissertation.
yeah.
Uh,
125
I want to hear
letters.
Mike Stephanie.
No, me too.
No.
I'm kind of hoping it becomes the biggest one. No offense, Jen.
I mean, there's a lot of typing going on there.
There
This
is.
is.
I
What a thumb movement.
Like a thesis.
Woo! Whoa!
Whoa!
That's
Yeah,
not
it
right.
is.
What?
No, it's
Wow.
That's still not you?
That that is very much. Is that not Mike?
Nope.
It sounds like him. The
It
demolition.
does.
Yeah.
Mike, say it in your voice.
Who wrote that? Does anybody want to own that?
People want to be anonymous?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. It's
They're allowed
not.
to be anonymous.
You're the only one who's like.
Most of mine was large for a while, but now it's.
Alright, I would have made it better, but
Oh!
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Anybody
like
else still
gratitude.
going?
We
Oh, so many emojis?
Oh, go Mary.
Who emoji?
You
That's
cannot
fire.
do gifts or
Yeah.
Get
gifs.
fired.
It's so funny.
You told Mary she could do
Hey,
a
come
bit.
on, guys. Serious things up here. Reprimand them.
Pray, love, okay. That is.
I love it.
Okay, are people still typing?
Yeah, being
Yeah,
in awe
now
of God
I'm
is a new
getting
one.
warmed up here.
We get one
Oh,
more.
yeah,
Way too much fun.
Oh, you're supposed to do up to 3?
Yeah, I want to try that next.
You get maxed out at 3.
I thought we were only doing 1.
Oh gosh.
That's why.
Are you planning for more?
Yeah.
No, I can't. I got it. That was it. That's my definition at my funeral.
Oh, shade. What?
That's how I'm gonna go down. I'm saying. I'm sticking to it. It's my story. It didn't come out right. I'm sorry.
This is
Anybody still typing? I don't see.
No,
I
it's just-
see some. We're good.
Is that you, man?
I don't know. Dave back there is typing.
Oh my God.
Oh no, it's alright.
That's-
It's
it's
all
dancing like
good.
Dave
It's all good.
Oh, both
I'm
Daves.
trying Bitmoji, but it doesn't work. It won't stop.
Bitmoji won't work.
It won't work.
Okay, guys.
So
So
this is good. This is good.
look at this. This is good stuff. What we bring, how we live,
That's good.
being in. That's the answer.
That's really good.
We're done. Being in awe of God, turning to Jesus and giving Him our undivided attention, heart, lifting up God, the expressions of gratitude to God for His love and friendship toward us all, turning our hearts towards something, acknowledging who God is, something with a T, to us, awe, wonder, surrender, and glee at who God is and what He does. Worship is surrender, spending time with God, giving worth to something, demonstration of adoration of the Lord. Hallowed be thy name. Holding God in high esteem. Prayer, heart, okay.
Okay.
A way of life, holding dear. The act and process of giving God our full attention and adoration. Dance party, rainbows. Worship is honoring God with all of your heart, soul, and strength. Prayer fire. Time with God. The demolition of self-focus and attention and redirecting towards God.
Ooh, I like
Who wrote that?
I like that one.
Mike.
Anonymous.
No, I didn't write that.
Nah. Tina wrote it. These are awesome.
It doesn't say singing.
Yeah, those are my Bitmojis.
It doesn't say singing. Except for this one, there's like no real reference to music.
That looks more like dancing.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting,
And
right?
rainbows.
Is that you?
I
That is
guess
really
you don't need
interesting.
music to dance. So you guys all win the game. You guys are all winners. Not just you, John. You're not the only winner, man.
That's the judges table.
Yes.
Marion
Corey's
defined
is
worship in her
pleased.
teaching.
Yes. This tells me that everyone was listening to Marianne's teaching,
Turning our affection toward God is what you say.
which is awesome.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that nobody mentioned music,
Mm.
right?
Totally.
Perfect.
Whereas most of the world would define worship with music.
Interesting.
But what's also interesting is when we say what is worship, these are the definitions we get. But when we say practice worship, it's like, oh, we need music,
Mm.
right? So that's where I think things get a little bit fuzzy for people. The act of worship, in theory, what worship is, I think we get that, right? But when we say, how do we incorporate worship into our lives, that becomes a little bit harder. There's not like structured answers to that, right? So we know that the culture at the 166 is to basically live out our calling in our day-to-day lives, right? And most of the things in our faith are kind of small, seemingly insignificant and consequential things, right? That we just have to be good stewards of, right? And occasionally some big fancy things too, right? That's what we're called to. But as you guys know, worship exists outside of music. So what's with the worship industry then? Why are there so many? There's so many things. So I did some research, and this guy, Wen Regan, he writes, how did rock and roll, the best music for worshiping the devil, become the finest music for worshiping God? Right? Don't get mad at him. This was not his sentiment. This was just what his study was about. And so what he was looking at was the birth of contemporary worship.
Joshua Tree.
Some
The
might
album,
believe
I'm
that.
sorry.
Some might believe that. So it's really interesting because what we understand the worship industry to be right now was completely non-existent like 50 years ago. Not that long ago, right? And so a lot of times, for a lot of people, what's shaping our understanding of worship is Spotify playlists and YouTube videos. People learn how to lead worship by watching, I don't even know, Kim Walker or some well-known kind of celebrity worship leader, right? Like, how does one learn how to worship? For a lot of people, they learn through YouTube, right? So it's really interesting because he investigated this in his thesis. And so basically what he found was that the birth of contemporary worship was essentially church strategy. There was a divide in generations. One generation thought rock and roll was the music of the devil, right? And the next generation thought it's the best thing in the world. So how do you get that new generation into the church? Contemporary worship music. So that's how the church responded, by birthing something that looks like something that's kind of familiar to us, right? Worship teams didn't exist back then. Drums, electric guitars, keyboards, beanies, and beards did not exist back then.
That's cool. Right?
But now it's like, not for anybody here, but it's like there's salient features in what we understand worship to be. And what's interesting is that we basically took what we understood worship to be, we bumped the altar over to make room for the stage, right? We just took worship and planted it on a social construct that was already familiar to us. Concerts, bands, performers, and lo and behold, contemporary worship music. Some people are feeling a little weird about this right now. I'm feeling a little bit weird about it.
They need a sign to tell you that it's worship, just because that's not loud at all.
I know.
Sorry, is the thing on the left also a worship thing?
Yeah, so I just Googled
Got it.
contemporary
Got it.
worship.
That one's weird. It's like 2 layers. Is that 2
Contemporary
bands?
worship got me this.
Yeah, that's crazy. That
Right.
left one.
So, I mean, I don't mean to criticize, right? It's bore a lot of good fruit too, right? It's important for a lot of people who don't really have access to any kind of resources, but YouTube channels, and I mean, there's a lot of good things that come out of like Bethel, Hillsong. Like, I'm not like here to criticize that. I'm just trying to explore where we might have gone overboard, where we might have gone a little bit off track, and thinking about the origins of this industry gives us an idea of what we need to know to build a culture here, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
Good. And this would be just primarily from like the Protestant church
Yeah, white evangelical.
aspect.
It's funny, I was just about to say, so what's interesting about all this is before the white evangelicals started with the contemporary worship, there was stuff happening in the African American churches that was similar to what was happening, what would happen a little bit later. The entrance of gospel and the industry of gospel music. And also Roman Catholics started exploring folk music in their masses. Didn't really stick. But like, it was just, there was a clear need, right, to reach a generation that wasn't understanding the language of the church at the time, right? It's not insidious. It's like they felt like this was our best thing that we needed to do, right? There's a group of people that are not really interested in the current worship style or the church styles at the time. Dare I say, not too different from even us, right, here in this group, right? Like, we do church differently. There's a reason why we've bought into this, right? Because it's important. Like, we felt like, oh, maybe it's not something that we want to, be, for me, myself, being a church with super high production kind of things, like, I want to be the church. Like, I don't want to just do church in 2 hours, right? So, not insidious at all. It looks bad when you Google it. It really does looks a lot worse than it actually is. There's really good fruit that comes out of it. It's just important for us to know context, right? So these are, I Googled vineyard worship style. There's a reason why no one knows our name anymore. Nobody knows who the vineyard is, right? I love vineyard. I mean, I love vineyard and the way vineyard does worship. Like, I grew up in that, totally. And I love playing on teams. I love building community with my teams and doing something together for the church. I love that stuff. I'm not like discounting any of that. I'm not criticizing any of that. It's just important for us to know, be in the know. So anyway, this is really complicated, right? And a lot of people want this, because that's just the temperature of the room, right? Like, of society. This is what we kind of want, even though we might not admit it. Like, we want people to worship on a large scale and be a part of that, right? At least I did. So for me, things got really complicated, and what happened for me was that I left the stage, and so I had to rebuild an altar that didn't have to do with the stage in my life. So if we go back to the basics and think about that huge stage, and then think about like this, right? Like, it's really interesting that worship has become the means to something instead of being the end. So there's my favorite worship leader, his name is David Bruce. I'm going to butcher this, but he always says, worship is the end, not the means to an end. You worship God. You don't worship to get to God. You just worship God, right? When we get caught up in the industry and the music, like, that becomes a means to an end, right? So that's a very subtle distinction that we just have to remember. Like, when this is at the center, that's just the end. Like, that's it, right? And so we just have to consider all that, again, when we're building the culture here. So we're going to do a little case study to talk about, like, where we get things right and where we get things wrong, okay? And that case study is me, my life. So I started leading worship when I was 15. I'm like 22 now.
It's only 10 years.
I'm 42 now, so that's been a long time, and I've changed quite a bit. I've gotten a lot of things wrong, a couple of things right, but mostly a lot of things wrong. One thing that hasn't changed in that time is that I feel like I never fit the profile of a worship leader. You guys know that profile, right? That's what I'm talking about.
No beard cleaning.
No beard. Engaging, somebody who likes to be on stage, somebody who can, like, work the team, work a crowd. Like, in my mind, like, that's kind of what a worship leader, what's going to say? Come in.
Go ahead.
I'm not very dynamic. I don't like being in front of people. I don't like trying to sing a certain way, right? I'm a little Eeyore-ish and, whatever, being on stage. And I've always felt kind of different, and not in a good way. But leading worship made me feel like there was something bigger in me, like I was a part of something bigger, right? And almost like I was a different person. So right there, right, I'm already operating from a place of need. I was leading worship because I needed something from it, right? I mean, I'm like looking back on my life, so of course I can see that clearly now, but I could not see that when I was 15. So I'm like needing something from worship, and by the way, I'm just giving you like the Cliff Notes version of this. If you don't know what Cliff Notes are, I'm sorry. But if we were like to fast forward several years, because I'm like needing something from worship, it's becoming more and more enmeshed in my identity and like who and my value, right? Like I felt like I was better as a worship leader than I was like as a person. I was more validated as a worship leader than I was as a person. I was accepted into certain groups more because I was a worship leader, not because I was a person, the type of person I was. And so that gets like really messy, right? So leading worship is now filling holes internally for me, and it's also clothing me on the outside as well, right, to become this thing. I'm a worship leader. I am not Debbie, I'm a worship leader, right? That sounds really simple, but I think we all kind of do that, right? We all find something that fills our holes and also clothes us in things, whether or not be worship leader or whatever it is. And so the thing is that I didn't see anything wrong with it because people were affirming of me. They were like, oh, I have a word from you. The Lord is telling me this promise. You're going to do this in worship. So I'm like, yes. Yes. You're right. Damn. So, it was totally good, right? So it's like my dream. It's becoming more and more my lifeline, right? And then I start to get asked to lead worship at bigger venues. So I'm like, yes, more validation, that I should be doing this, that I should continue doing this the way that I'm doing it, right? And so I'm finding myself, I'm like losing myself, right? I also had kids, and nothing helps you lose yourself more than kids. Right? So I'm getting very burnt out. Several things happened, and I quit my job as a worship pastor. I gave up the stage. The week that I stopped leading worship at church happened to be the week that the live recording of the national conference where I led worship came out. And so somebody says to me, someone in authority over me says, you're like quitting like the week that your like CD is coming out. Like, don't you think that's interesting that you're stepping down at the height of your career? And I was like, oh, that was really hard to hear. Not just because I was offended. I'm like, this is not my career. This is my calling, right? There's difference. There's a huge difference. But also it bothered me because it actually kind of resonated with me, right? Like, I was offended only because it kind of was true. For me, this was my career. This is my lifeline. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I killed my career. I gave up the stage. How am I ever going to lead worship anywhere else, right? This is a competitive industry, right? People will forget me in a second. How am I going to reclaim my spot once I'm done? I'm like, I sabotaged my career, right? I sabotaged my calling. God made all these promises to me, and then I went ahead and just cut off the only proof that the promises were being fulfilled, right? I'm like, what am I doing? Changing diapers, right? I'm dying. For 6 years, I was dying, right? And was I forgotten? Absolutely, right? Was I ever asked to do anything else? No, not really, right? I mean, I was dying. And so there's a lot of other things that happened. Fast forward another 6 years. And I come across this passage 2 weeks ago. And it's Abraham and Isaac. Abraham sacrificing Isaac. And I've read that like a million times because I grew up in the church. And so it's a common story. It's an awful story, right, to read. So you read it and you're alarmed by how little information it gives you, right? But I read it and there were so many things that were clearer to me. And I'm going to read it with you guys. It's in teeny tiny letters, so I will read it out loud. It's a little bit long, so brace yourself. Genesis 22. It continues. The sacrifice of Isaac. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, I and the boy will go over there, and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. And I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. There's like so much. We could spend a whole day looking at this passage. But I want to just point out 5 things that I noticed about worship. And it has nothing to do with music. There was no music here. But it's 5 things that I think that we can take with us when we leave. And this is a difficult passage, and there's a lot of questions that it raises. But I want us to just focus on 5 things. And the first thing I want us to notice is how Abraham engaged. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. He did not dilly-dally. God told him to do something. He woke the next day and did it. I researched. It takes about 3 days to get to Moriah from Beersheba. So he did not take the long route. God told him something. He engaged with the horror of it, and he did it. He went. Okay? So that's point 1 of worship. We listen, and when God calls us to do something, we do it. Right? So I felt like God basically pointed out that I sabotaged my promise, just the way he's sabotaging his promise. And I went like spiritually comatose for years. He got up and did it. did not delay. And what I want us to ask ourselves is, in what way is God speaking to you guys about laying down a promise to pursue his voice? Pursue him, not the promise. Much like Jesus was like, don't pursue the miracles, right? Pursue me. So instead of pursuing the promise, how are we pursuing him? Question to just hold in your mind. I think the only reason why Abraham was able to do this was because he had this very steady perspective. Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they both of them together. He didn't say God will provide us the lamb. God wasn't bailing him out. He said he will provide for himself the lamb. Right? I think for myself a lot of times when I think about faith, I think he's gonna bail me out. I will do it because last minute he's gonna, right? Like, I'm not gonna study for this test because he's gonna give me the, like, I know that's a very simplistic kind of thing, but I think we do that a lot. Faith is not about bailing out. He had steady perspective on who God was. I think that's the only reason why he was able to engage, right? His own son, who he knows he has to kill, was like, where's the lamb? I mean, as a father, like, how do you answer that? Right? God will provide for himself. Okay? But God's going to do what he needs to do here. So, how are we wobbly in our faith? Where are we kind of saying, all right, I'm just looking for you to bail me out? I mean, I think there's a part of faith that's like that, right? But I think, we can use Abraham's example here. Just that little distinction in the pronoun says a lot, okay? The next thing I think that's important in worship is posture change. And Abraham, God calls him. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, right? There's like a lot of movement. God calls him. Abraham stops, right? He changes his gaze and his posture, turns around behind him to look what's behind. There's a lot of movement. And this was an intense moment. There was a certain trajectory, right, that was happening. Like, if there was music, it was like intense music, right? Right? Like, Abraham stopped. He heard his voice, God's voice, and he stopped from what he was doing, lifted his eyes up, looked behind him. Posture change is central to worship, right? And if we're headed this way, sometimes worship is heading this way. Sometimes it's heading the same way, right? But it's just about listening. And so I want us to think about, like, worship for us, like, how is God calling us? Is there a certain, like, momentum that we have built that we just need to check in with God about? Maybe he wants us to go a different way. But that posture change and that movement, I think, is really important. The fourth thing, which is my favorite thing, is expression. This is my favorite part. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Abraham named this. He expressed it. He took something that was happening internally and he said it out loud, which I think is really important. And I think this is the part where this is like the part where we exist when we talk about worship, right? Is this step of expression. There's so much that happens before that, but this is my favorite because it's so beautiful. And like the fact that generations after have called it the same thing is like so like rich with like kingdom significance, right? you name something in your own life that has ripples in the kingdom for multiple years and generations to come, right? In our journey, I think it's important. We see this all over the Old Testament, right? Like, and he named this place. It's so important for us to express this, to name things, to be so in it and engage with it that we're able to give it a name, right? Able to pinpoint it and express it. And then the fifth thing that we often forget is just went home.
Yeah.
Went home. This is our everyday, right? Do your life. Like, now that you've experienced this, right? Go home, go back. It's where he came from, Beersheba. He went back, right? I think, like, that's like the lather, rinse, repeat. Like, that's worship. We do it over and over, and then we go home, we do it again. We experience something, then we do it again. That's worship. Ongoing 5 things, right? So I had this amazingly like healing experience at a retreat a couple weeks ago, and I came back and had the same questions, right? Same questions still exist, same issues still exist, right? Just because you go to retreat and you're all like fired up now, right? Doesn't mean like that things go away. So we go home and we just attack it a different way, right? In a different posture change, with a different expression. So, to sum up, engage with the hard stuff, have a steady perspective, change your posture, express, and then do life. So where's the beef? Where's the music? Because we cannot talk about music, right? Because it is what it is. So music is amazing. Ask Mike. It's incredible. It's like otherworldly, right? It's this universal language that we have. It's a gift that God gave us to express like the 5 things. The expression part is like, I mean, could he have just had us just keep it in on the inside? Yeah. But God's not about that. He's like relational, right? So he wants us to express. He wants there to be an exchange between us and him. He loves that. And so music is a way that we can all unite all over the world, right? Even if the words are different, like the music is something that it actually draws things out of us, right? Even if you're not a musically inclined person, you go to like a concert and music does something. It's like worshipful. It might not be worshipful to God, but it's worshipful, right? So I couldn't just leave out music altogether. So I just thought I would give you some beautiful quotes here. I will read them because the font is too small. Music is an agreeable harmony for the honor of God and the permissible delights of the soul. Music is the shorthand of emotion. After silence, that which comes nearest to expressing the inexpressible is music. Where words fail, music speaks. Music can name the unnameable and communicate the unknowable. The music is not in the notes, but in the silence between. Music in the soul can be heard by the universe. Music is what tells us that the human race is greater than we really realize. But these great minds all get something about music, right? So I don't mean to completely cut it out of our discussion. I don't want it to be central to our discussion, but this is important because it's a gift, and so we should take it, right? It's a vehicle for worship. It's not worship itself. It's a language of worship. It's not worship itself. It's not the beef. It's the plate. Okay? So we're going to now, why you need that table, is we're going to go through these 5, I don't know what they are, steps, 5 points of worship. Worship culture at the 166 is about doing that every day. Doing that Abraham journey every day. And so what I'd like to do is to read to you guys parts of these litanies. You guys know what a litany is? Kind of like just like a prayer that can be spoken corporately. And speaking of silence, right? Power of silence next to music, right? Just examining ourselves, right? Through engaging, getting our perspectives right, posture change, expression. And the expression part, this is why we asked you to bring journals. I want us to write stuff down. I want us to write our worship down. Right? I'll give you more instructions about it a little bit later, but I want to go through those 5 things and have us just get in the practice of doing that. Does anyone need a pee break?
Yes.
Snack break?
2-minute breaks.
Yeah, we'll take a 2-minute break.
Debbie, what are the 5 steps again?
Engage. Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take you guys through it like,
Oh, there you go. Yeah, hold that up.
What did I miss? What's the
go downstairs and get the flags, the banner.
lesson?
I should have knocked
What are
the
we
back.
gonna do? You said to-
Yeah.
Oh, we're just gonna go
Singing
through each of the steps. But when we get to the part where we have to do something, I'll give you more instructions.
We're gonna go through the steps together.
Yeah, and then sing worship.
Get out,
Do
Ted.
you want me to
Oh,
Your-
yeah.
Your expression throughout this has been priceless.
I didn't even see it.
Debbie,
Mm.
do you know two? But there's a song it's about killing the idolatry of music. Says, this is by Isaac, this is the man. It's what's out.
It was actually listened to very good.
As far as- This is beautiful, this is like spot on.
No, no, actually.
So you-
Just because I feel like
seriously, I could listen to you all day. Yeah, really, it's like engaging, kind of doing polls, it's in, it's got, I didn't take my attention deficit medication today, I'm on block.
Oh, good. That is like the best. I am in.
It's so cool to hear you on the other side. It's so empowering. Worth every part of your journey.
But I tell this for a while.
But it's how it works.
Suffer well. Came through.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write my phone just because my handwriting.
Oh, where is it?
Maybe she'll write with it. She likes to write.
Yeah, should I write on my
So I figured that you could
How you doing, Nate?
do some stuff out and backward, and then I just wrote
Good.
whatever.
Work was hard.
About truth and
Wait, that's what you prepared for? How'd it go? What? I fixed it. That's awesome. Got affirmations.
Yeah, everyone knows about
That's awesome. Don't tell your sister.
I'm like, that's how I use her. What do I do?
Did you? She's suffering with her presentation right before that one.
When I'm the culprit, when I'm the fault of his anger, or when
It's good.
he's being lied to,
Really good.
oh,
Look at you guys over there enjoying not having to do
I'm
anything.
almost done. But this French song is
Good at it.
it's like
I
three of them
that's part
are
of the
very similar in terms of the aesthetic.
accountability for what
6
happened.
degrees, very compressed, very natural sounding. Not a lot of production. just honest and
It's 24
it's
years.
deep, a lot of dynamic range. Like if it's a record,
So,
it's
so
really
for
good.
my own,
There's two songs. One is more rock, like six, but it's still 60s or so. I thinned it out a little bit, and I got that aesthetic right. This fifth, this is such an issue because it's not true.
Forgot to add Madonna in that heavy.
She wanted to have
Forgot to add Madonna. Music makes the people come together.
okay,
That's deep.
is he like the rest of my family?
That's deep.
So
I'm like you, like, I mean, that.
Do you think that I would ever
I haven't played this
quote a song that you could just break out into?
Oh, I know, see, that was why. Wait, what did that Music.
Makes the people come
The
together.
low octave, yes, and then the higher
The
octave,
bourgeoisie and the rebel.
playing two melodies,
It's all about hatred.
and I had to amplify those,
Oh, Madonna.
and then create like almost like a storm kind of
I
thing.
don't know who that is.
There are more elements that are supposed to be
Hey,
going
Mr.
on
DJ, good record.
in this one.
You know the song? How do people not know Madonna's music?
You don't know Madonna.
Well, it has to.
You know Madonna, the Mother of God?
It's just strange because it doesn't feel like the drums when they come in, like this is huge. The intro's a verse and
Because the problem is that I kind of wonder if he looks at that thing.
and then this
It's kind of like, well, the
which is
problem, you know,
it settles back down.
let's give him
And
negative.
her
That's the
vocal
only
performance is
thing.
dynamic. It's not she sings like this very calm.
Yeah, I don't know what to do.
I swear.
Yeah, you need it because it's probably ages to come up with it.
So she sings it well.
He loves to
In my
All she hear about himself as a kid, because he has no memory.
every time I just
Many ways, the Catholic Church
the big snares.
I remember for a
I think 80s back, the snares got blood. Right? It's like somehow he keeps going.
He was more so,
So I'm really struggling with that.
he was more
But I think I just
self-destructive.
let it be.
I was great friends, or the life was trying, it's not, I'm trying to hurt my mom, upset my mom.
So it's like below 5 is sacred still.
Okay.
Because I was kind of
Well, that's
wondering.
the way I'm looking at it is, I'm thinking, the thing he's gonna respond to the most is if I say, you're the mom that can go better. The sexual life.
No, that's yours. She asked me about Kara asked me about this today. Right.
So they can discuss it.
Which one? Like what's that?
Including his first
This?
wife.
So in between, I'm gonna just do a little commercial. There's a woman who I think currently is in the vineyard. Her name is Fran Pratt, and she writes these beautiful litanies, and they're just good to even read for yourself. And she's super like real. Like she writes them for very real things. Racism, everything from like racism to communion, right? I mean, it's really, really good. She also has a website that you can go to. I think there's like a monthly, I think if you want access to all of her stuff. But this book is really great. It's called Call and Response. Such good stuff in here. I'm gonna read parts of it. So as I take you through the 5 steps, I don't like to call them steps, but whatever.
Everything has 5 steps.
5 steps, yes.
We need 12 steps.
We're simple
Four's
folk.
not enough, 6 is too much.
We're numerals.
It has to be an odd number.
You're right.
3 is too much like the Trinity. We don't want to take away from that. So, as I take you through the 5 things, 5 whatevers, I'm going to read you part of the litany to help you just be in the moment.
Do we write now?
No,
Oh.
you don't have to write. Just be. And then in the expression part is where we will write. That's where we will express. So what that's going to look like, just to give you, for people who like to have a plan beforehand, the expression part is, we're gonna just have us take some time to write down our prayers. And keep it short, 2 to 6 lines. I'll give you like a scaffolding, just if you need it. And then we're gonna, if you're comfortable with it, we're gonna share. We're gonna make it corporate. So what we will do is, if you're comfortable in sharing the prayer, you will read it out loud. Then you will lead us in the chorus of All Things Rise.
What?
Not singing.
Oh.
We're just gonna read it. I will
Sorry.
show you the words. So you will read your prayer. You have to sing it. Perfect. That's okay, we're gonna do it. You're gonna read it. And then you're gonna read the chorus and lead us all through your prayer and sort of the response to your prayer, or the addition to your prayer. And we will join you in saying All Things Rise. I will do it first, so give you like an idea. You don't all have to share, but there's something powerful in you guys are leading the worship for us. Something personal to you, and then something corporate, right? And we're not going to bring music into it at
This
all.
is worship?
This is worship.
I love it.
So, ready?
Thank you.
Engage. May your pauses be long, your silences deep, your voices sonorous, your responses resonant, and your every breath a prayer. So you can close your eyes or keep them open, but let's just have a silent time to engage with God and ask Him what He's saying to you right now about your life. He's asking you to do something. Creator, when we walk with you, connected to you, plugged into your love and your life, our hearts expand, our consciousness expands, our perspective expands, our reality expands, our capacity for love expands. God, we ask that you would speak to us about who you are and set our perspective right and steady. We'll take another minute or so. We admit that we tend to become complacent and stagnant in our imaginations. We succumb to inertia and allow our dreams to wither. Awaken us now to what is inside us. Awaken us to the authority you've given us. Awaken us to the potential inside our situations. Awaken us to the power we can access. Awaken us, call us, shift us, turn us in whatever way you need, Lord. Let's take another minute or so and see how God's moving us. Help us to be okay with expressing a full range of emotions, lament and joy, anger and affection, gratitude and disgust, excitement and sadness, doubt and empathy. Give us words that reveal our souls and directly aim for your heart. Let our prayers pour out of our hearts and onto paper. Join with us in the hunger of our hearts, Lord. So you can take a few minutes, write like 2 to 6 lines of things that maybe God's been talking to you for the last couple minutes about. If you need some structure, sometimes I like to think of my prayers as having like a balance of adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication, which is like asking. You don't have to use this structure. You just use your everyday language. It doesn't have to be flowery or poetic at all. Just honest. And if you're willing to share, you can read it out loud. I'll go first just to like set things going. But let's give it a few minutes.
How many prayers?
2 to 6 lines. How are we doing? You guys want more time? So while you guys just finish up, what I was thinking, the thinking behind this was to express something individually and then to share it corporately and then have a corporate response, right? So like what was really cool to me was just how when Abraham said, oh, God will provide a lamb for himself. And there was like so much buy-in that even Isaac was like, okay, and then they started walking off together, right? And I just want us to have that corporate buy-in to one another, right? So you write something down, you share it, comes individually from your heart, and then as a body, we join with you in agreeing and like lifting up those prayers together. So I think it looks like people aren't writing as much, so I'm just gonna start. You are a God who is delicate and fierce. You relate to us in just the way we need, even if it isn't always pleasant. Thank you for taking care of me in the best way and not bending to my will. I feel safe, I feel taken care of. And we're all going to join in this. Let all things rise and bless your name. All things made right and new again. O Lord our God, your goodness is free and boundless. Your beauty arches above it all. Does anyone else want to share? Just call it out. Just say it.
Well, this was also inspired by the first image. You call me to sit with you and share all my burdens and fears. You say, trust me with your life and I will be pleased. So I will sit with you and tell you my fears, for your perfect love for me casts out all fear.
Awesome. Let all things rise and bless your name. All things made right and new again. O Lord our God, your goodness is free and boundless. Your beauty arches above it all. Let's do maybe two more just for time's sake.
God, please give me grace to learn in this life how to be your dependable friend. That I wouldn't need to learn to trust you, but in our friendship, inherently understand that you are trustworthy and presuppose that about you. That I would know you as provider, investor, partner, commissioner, and live out all those realities in all I do, free of fear and worry.
Let all things rise and bless your name. All things made right and new again. O Lord our God, your goodness is free and boundless. Your beauty arches above it all. Do one more.
I mean, I just wrote throughout, but it's sort of from God's perspective, I guess. It says, problem-solving season is done. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. I am light, I am your faithful witness. I am your creator, I am joy, peace, truth. I am your standard bearer. Before was behind, but now is before. Behold, be. Maker, make with me my mind, my matters. mind my manners, mind my ways. Give into life I gave you for glory. Come for me, I come in glory.
How you respond to that? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So let all things rise and bless your name. All things made right and be new again. O Lord our God, your goodness is free and boundless. Your beauty arches above it all. Awesome. Okay, so the last part. Holy Spirit, lover of our souls, you have set us in this world, each with intention, destiny, and purpose, and given us opportunities to know you, to connect with you, and to become our best selves. So, what is worship? What is the worship culture of the 166? Since it's so small, you guys can't read it. I'm gonna read it. It was supposed to be like a responsive reading, but let me just read it for you.
I can read it.
Oh, you can? You guys can read it? So, you guys read the bold, right? God, we've been stuck in cycles of scarcity.
You bring us into abundance.
We've worked our fingers to the bone in our own power.
You invite us into the ease and flow of yours.
We've waited and waited for our big break.
You point out the breakthroughs all around us.
If only we have eyes to see,
Ears to listen,
hearts to feel,
and hands to receive.
we will perceive the riches of your grace.
Shown to us in the kindness of Christ.
And when we get into your flow,
Letting go of ego.
letting go of preconceived expectations,
Letting go of past and future.
into the brilliant now,
Into the spirit.
we can be like little kids again,
Wide-eyed with wonder.
surprised by fun and goodness.
Trusting in your kindness.
The nets we lowered empty,
Will be raised full.
the lives we surrendered empty.
Will be raised full.
Help us into the flow of abundance.
That is life in the spirit. Amen.
Let's pray. So, God, we want to live like that. Wide-eyed with wonder, trusting in your kindness. And while the world would think that's naive and maybe a little dumb, we trust in you. We let go of the things that we need to let go. We reorient and change our posture towards you or towards wherever you're taking us, God. We surrender to you and we express to you because you love that. You want to relate to us. I love when my kids talk to me. So God, help us to talk to you like your kids. We want to live in the flow of abundance with worshipful lives, with worshipful hearts, and with the gift of music to say it all. So invite us, God, into the ease and flow of your power and change our standards. Don't let the world define our standards, but speak to us all around, all day long. We surrender to you, God, because we trust you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. To give you the info about Fran's stuff, that's her website.